There is a small windowless room on the second floor of the Marine Corps Intelligence Schoolhouse at Dam Neck, Virginia. 8 feet by 10. One table, 2 chairs, a wall-mounted recorder. On the 30th of January, 2013, at 1422 hours, a sergeant named Tessa Mullins walked into that room to take a graded interrogation exam. The role player sitting across the table from her was the lead instructor of her course, a sergeant major, 22 years in, combat tours in Fallujah and Helmand, Bronze Star with Valor. He was also her ex-husband. He had spent 6 weeks failing her in front of 30 Marines, marking down her papers, calling her by everything except her rank. Once in front of the class, referring to her as my former spouse, the way you'd refer to a piece of furniture you used to own. At minute 15 of that exam, he broke role. He stopped being the detainee. He started being himself. And he said something to her, 22 seconds of it, that ended his career inside 72 hours. He thought the room was his. He thought the recorder on the wall was his. He thought she had walked in unprepared. She had not walked in unprepared. There was a second recorder in that room. There had been a second recorder in every room, every morning for 42 days. There was a folder, 91 pages and growing, in the file cabinet of a chief warrant officer down the hall. There was a staff sergeant keeping a parallel grade sheet. There was a sergeant who had moved seats on day 2 and had not moved back. The room was not his. The room had been hers since day 1. She just hadn't told him yet. My name is Marcus Hatch. You're listening to the record. Sit down. I want to read you something. It's 2 sentences from a counterstatement filed on the 18th of February, 2013. The man who wrote it was a sergeant major in the United States Marine Corps. 22 years in. Combat tours in Fallujah and Ramadi. Drill instructor ribbon. Master training specialist designation. A career, on paper, you don't argue with. Here are the 2 sentences. My ex-wife is professionally jealous and has fabricated this complaint to damage my career out of resentment over our 2009 divorce. I have never made any inappropriate statement in a classroom setting. That's what he wrote, on official letterhead, to a lieutenant colonel, with his signature at the bottom. 6 weeks earlier, on the 7th of January, 2013, in a classroom of the Marine Corps Intelligence School, Dam Neck Annex, Virginia Beach, in front of 30 recruits in their first morning of the MAGTF Intelligence Specialist course. That same man stood at a lectern, looked at a sergeant in the 3rd row, and said something different. I'm not going to repeat what he said. Not yet. I'll repeat it once. Later, when it earns the weight. But I'll tell you this. She recorded it. Her recorder was already on. She had switched it on as she sat down because she had been told by a friend who had taken the course the year before that this instructor talked fast and you needed the audio if you wanted clean notes. She switched it on at 0758 hours. Class started at 0800. So when he said what he said at 0803, the recorder caught it, and the recorder kept running. Every class, every day, for 6 weeks, 42 sessions. When she graduated, first in the class, distinguished graduate, she walked across the parade deck at 1,140 hours on the 22nd of February, walked into the office of the school commandant, Lieutenant Colonel Reina Castellanos, and put 3 things on her desk: a graduation certificate, a 1-page written complaint, and a USB drive labeled in her own handwriting, Class 13-2, audio log, 42 sessions. Lieutenant Colonel Castellanos listened to 10 minutes of that audio. Then she picked up the phone. By 1500 hours that same afternoon, the sergeant major was driving north on I-64 toward Quantico, 1 rank lower than he had started the day with, reassigned to an administrative billet in a support directorate where he would never teach another Marine again. He retired 3 years later. 24 years of service. He never instructed again. He never, as far as I've been able to find out, said her name in public again either. Her name is Tessa Mullins. In 2013, she was a sergeant. Today, she's a chief warrant officer too. Marsoc Intel Cell, Camp Lejeune. Same last name. She never changed it. We'll get to why. This is the story of those 42 sessions and of the 4 nights in a 1-bedroom apartment in Virginia Beach when she sat at a kitchen table and decided what she was going to do. I didn't know her. I want to say that up front. I have never met Tessa Mullins. I had one phone call with her in March of 2023, 10 minutes, and she answered 3 questions and declined to answer 4 others. What I know from documents. 3 of them, mostly. Her complaint. His counterstatement. The witness statement of the senior junior instructor on the course, Staff Sergeant Ruben Ortiz. And from a transcript of the audio, certified by a JAG paralegal in May of 2013, which a friend of mine who used to work CID let me read in a room in Quantico over the course of one afternoon in 2022. I'm not going to play the audio. I've heard parts of it. I'm not going to play it, but I'll tell you what's on it, and I'll tell you what's not. Let me back up. To do this right, I have to start before the classroom, before the divorce, before the Corps. I have to tell you who she was when she signed her name on a piece of paper in a courthouse in Mobile, Alabama, in the spring of 2009, and walked out into a parking lot and sat in a 2003 Honda Civic for 45 minutes before she turned the key. Tessa Mullins was born Tessa Marie Boudreau in 1984 in Mobile, Alabama. Her father was Ray Boudreau, a lineman for the City Water Utilities Department. 41 years on the job by the time he retired. Not a quiet man, a loud man, a union man. He ran for steward of his local twice, lost the first time by 11 votes, won the second time by 60. He came home from those meetings still arguing, sometimes with himself, in the driveway before he'd come inside. Her mother was Carolyn Boudreau, who taught high school biology in a public school for 33 years. Patient, watchful, the kind of woman who could end a dinner table fight with one sentence and then go back to her plate. Tessa had one younger brother, Cody. He's a firefighter in Mobile now. They get along. They don't talk often, but they get along. This was not a military family. Nobody in her line had served. Her grandfather had been deferred during Korea on a medical and worked the docks for 40 years. Her uncles were carpenters, mechanics, one accountant. The Boudreau house had a flag on the porch on the 4th of July, and that was about it. What Tessa got from her father wasn't a uniform. It was the loudness. The willingness to be the one talking when the room wanted her to shut up. He never told her to do that. She watched him do it. By the time she was 12, she was doing it herself. In 9th grade, she got into a public argument with a vice principal about a dress code violation that wasn't actually a violation. She had the handbook in her hand. The vice principal sent her home. Her father went to the next school board meeting, read the handbook out loud at the microphone for 4 minutes, and the policy got rewritten the following month. Tessa told me in our 10-minute phone call exactly one thing about her father. She said, "He taught me to bring paper." That was the whole sentence. I asked her what she meant. She said, "You'll figure it out." I think I figured it out. I'll come back to it. She went to a community college in Mobile for 2 years after high school. Wanted to be a paralegal. Was good at it. Got an associate's degree in 2004 with a 3.8 GPA. That was the same year she met Wade Mullins. He was a Marine Staff Sergeant on leave in Mobile to see a cousin's wedding. 32 years old. She was 19. They met at the reception. He was charming. She would later say in a deposition that I have read parts of the most certain person I had ever been in a room with. He knew where he stood. He knew where everyone else stood. He didn't apologize for things. She married him in 2005. She was 20. He was 33. He was an E7 by then, a gunnery sergeant stationed at Camp Lejeune. She moved to Jacksonville, North Carolina. Got a job at a paralegal firm off Wester Boulevard. Worked there for 4 years. Those 4 years are not in this story. Not because nothing happened. Things happened. But she has not talked about them in any document I have access to, and I am not going to invent them. What I'll say is this. By 2008, she was looking at a brochure for the Marine Corps recruiter on Lejeune Boulevard. She was 23. She kept the brochure in the bottom drawer of her dresser. He found it once. They had an argument. She put it back. He found it again. They had another argument. The second argument was different. He told her, and this is from her own deposition, quote, "If you ever put on that uniform, I will make your life hell. I will know people. I will know your instructors. I will know your commanders. I will make sure you wash out. You are not built for this." End quote. She filed for divorce 6 weeks later. The divorce was finalized in April of 2009. She kept the last name, not for any sentimental reason. Her lawyer told her the paperwork was simpler. She had also already started building a paralegal reputation under that name in Jacksonville. Changing it back to Boudreaux would have meant restarting professional references. She didn't have the time or the money, so she kept Mullins. She told me in the phone call that she did not regret keeping it. She said, "It became my name. I earned what's attached to it." He didn't. I asked her if she'd ever considered changing it later. After everything. She said no. I asked her why. She said because changing it now would let him write the ending. I'm not letting him write the ending. That's the kind of sentence you don't forget. She enlisted on the 3rd of June, 2010, 14 months after the divorce was finalized. She chose MOS 0231, Intelligence Specialist. She had scored a 94 on her ASFOB. She could have had most of what the Corps offered. She picked Intel because the recruiter told her the schoolhouse was at Dam Neck, Virginia, and Dam Neck was 3 states away from Lejeune. She did boot at Paris Island, 4th Battalion, August through November of 2010. Graduated meritorious. Got promoted to PFC out of boot, which is not common. Then MCT at Camp Geiger. Then the basic intel course at Dam Neck, January through April of 2011. She did well. Top quarter of her class. Got promoted to Lance Corporal at the end of the school. I want to pause here because this is the part where most stories about somebody like Tessa Mullins would skip ahead. They would say something like, "and then she rose through the ranks," or "and over the next few years she built her career." That kind of language, that kind of vague forward motion. I'm not going to do that. Between April of 2011 and January of 2013, 21 months, she was stationed at the Marine Corps Intelligence Activity at Quantico, supporting a regional analysis cell focused on the Horn of Africa. She got promoted to corporal in December of 2011. She got promoted to sergeant in October of 2012, which is fast for the 0231 community. She was good at the job. She was, by all the fitness reports I have seen redacted excerpts of, exceptional at the job. Her supervisor, a master sergeant whose name I'm not going to use because he asked me not to, told me in a phone call in 2022 that Tessa Mullins was the cleanest analytical writer I had on the floor. She wrote like she expected the reader to be busy, which they were. That's a piece of praise that doesn't sound like praise until you've read a lot of bad analytical writing. Then it sounds like a medal. In November of 2012, she got her orders for the MAGTF Intelligence Specialist course at Dam Neck. 6 weeks, January 7th through February 22nd, 2013. The advanced course, the one that gates the rest of an intelligence Marine's career. You needed to get anything above a junior analyst billet. You needed to get considered for warrant officer. You needed to do anything that matters in the long term. She got the orders on a Tuesday afternoon in November. She went home to her apartment in Stafford and pulled up the course roster online to see what she could find out about the cadre. The lead instructor was listed as Sergeant Major Wade Mullins. She told me on the phone, and this is one of the 3 things she answered, that she sat at her kitchen counter for about 90 minutes after she saw the name. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She made a pot of coffee, and she didn't drink it. She watched it go cold in the carafe. And she did 3 things in this order. First, she called the Inspector General's office at Marine Corps Intelligence Activity and asked, hypothetically, what the procedure would be for requesting an instructor recusal at a follow-on school. She did not give names. The IG clerk told her the procedure. Written request through the gaining command, citing specific cause. Decision rests with the school commandant. Second, she called a lawyer in Virginia Beach, a retired Navy JAG officer named Diane Heller, who ran a small civil practice off Independence Boulevard, and made an appointment for the following Saturday. She paid for the consultation out of pocket, $240. Third, she went to a Best Buy in Stafford and bought an Olympus WS 852 digital voice recorder, $79.99, plus tax. The Olympus WS 852 holds about 130 hours of audio at the standard recording quality. It has a battery life on a single charge of about 40 hours of continuous recording. It is the size of a stick of gum. It has 1 button on the side. You press it once, a small red light comes on, and it records. Why am I telling you the model number? I'm telling you the model number because every detail in this part of the story matters. Tessa Mullins did not improvise. She bought a specific tool in a specific store on a specific day with cash, and she kept the receipt. The receipt is in the case file. I've seen it. It's stapled to a sheet of yellow legal paper on which she wrote, in her own handwriting, purchased November 6th, 2012, for personal study notes, MAGF IS Course Jan, February 2013. She wrote that on the receipt the same day, she bought the recorder. 6 weeks before the course started. Before she even knew, formally, that she was going to need it for anything else. Her father taught her to bring paper. I think what he taught her was something a little wider than that. I think what he taught her was that the moment you anticipate the fight, you start building the file. Not after, not during, before. She went to the appointment with Diane Heller, the lawyer, on Saturday the 10th of November, 2012. The consultation lasted 90 minutes. Heller has not spoken to me. Attorney-client privilege survives, and Heller is the kind of lawyer who treats it as scripture. But Tessa described the consultation in her later complaint in 2 sentences. Kuata. Ms. Heller confirmed that under Virginia Code, one-party consent applies to audio recording. She advised that recordings made openly in a classroom setting for personal note-taking purposes, where the recorder is not concealed and recording is permitted by the instructor's standing policy, are admissible and lawful. End quote. I want to slow down on that for a second. Virginia is a one-party consent state. That means if you are a party to a conversation, meaning you are in a room, you're a part of what's being said, you can record it. You do not need the other party's permission. You do not need to disclose. You can put a recorder on the table and turn it on, and the law is on your side, as long as you are one of the people in the conversation. Some states are different. Maryland is two-party. California is two-party. If this had happened 40 miles north at Bethesda, it would have been a different story. It didn't. It happened in Virginia. The recording was legal. I want to be precise about something else. The Marine Corps Intelligence Schoolhouse at Dam Neck had a standing policy, posted in every classroom and printed in the course handbook, that students could record class sessions for personal note-taking purposes. This was not a special accommodation. This was standard. The handbook said so. I have read the handbook. The relevant policy is on page 11 of the 2013 student guide. So when Tessa Mullins walked into classroom 2B at 0755 hours on the 7th of January 2013, sat down in the third row from the front, took the Olympus WS 852 out of her cargo pocket, set on the desk beside her notebook in plain view, and pressed a button at 0758. She was not doing anything unusual. She was not doing anything covert. She was doing exactly what the schoolhouse told her in writing she was allowed to do. She was the only one who did it that day. The other 29 students took notes by hand. By week 2, 4 other students had brought recorders. By week 3, 11. By the end of the course, 16 of the 30 students were recording class sessions. I'll come back to that detail. It matters more than it sounds like. At 0759, Sergeant Major Wade Mullins walked into classroom 2B. He was 41 years old, 6'1", 190 pounds, shaved head, service uniform, alpha greens, ribbons including the Combat Action Ribbon, 2 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals, a Bronze Star with Combat V from Fallujah in 2004, Master Training Specialist pin, drill instructor ribbon. He set his coffee cup on the lectern. He set down a folder. He opened the folder. He looked at the roster. He looked at the roster for what Staff Sergeant Ortiz, the junior instructor, would later describe in his witness statement as approximately 7 to 10 seconds of silent staring. Then he looked up. He looked at the class. He found the third row. He found her. He said, "I told you I'd say it once. I'll say it once now. I'm not going to dress it up. I'm going to read it the way it shows up on the certified transcript. Timestamp 0803:14 hours. Quota. Recruits, meet my ex-wife. Sergeant Mullins. She's about to find out why I divorced her. Take a good look. This is what happens when somebody decides at 26 that their husband's career isn't enough for them. Class begins at 0805. You have 2 minutes." End quote. The transcript notes a pause of 11 seconds after that. Then the sound of him setting down a pen. Then him telling the class to open their student handbooks to page 17. Sergeant Tessa Mullins did not move during those 11 seconds. The recorder caught her breathing. According to the JAG paralegal who certified the transcript, you can hear her inhale at 0803:25, and you can hear her exhale at 0803:31. 6 seconds. 1 breath. Then she opened her student handbook to page 17. She did not look up from the handbook for the next 47 minutes. She did not raise her hand. She did not speak. At the end of the first session, at 0950, the class broke for 15 minutes. The other students filed out. Some of them looked at her. Most of them didn't know what to do with their faces. One of them, a sergeant named Devin Walker from 2nd Marine Division, walked past her desk and said quietly, "That was messed up, Sergeant." She nodded at him. She did not say anything back. He walked out. She stayed in her seat. She turned to a fresh page in her notebook. She wrote at the top in block letters, Class 13-2. Day 1. 0758 to 0950. Instructor remarks at 0803 recorded in full. Continue. Then she got up and went to the bathroom and washed her face with cold water and came back at 1005 and sat down for the second session of the day. And she pressed the button on the Olympus WS 852 again. That's where I'm going to stop the first part of this. I want you to sit with day 1 for a minute before I tell you about day 2. Because day 1 is the part most people would build the whole story around. The dramatic moment. The line. The class going silent. Day 1 is not the story. The story is the next 41 days. The story is what she did when the dramatic moment was over and the work began. I'll come back. Day 2. 8 January 2013. 0755 hours. Classroom 2B. Sergeant Tessa Mullins walked in. Same cargo pocket, same Olympus WS, 852, same notebook. She sat in the same desk. 3rd row from the front. 2 seats from the aisle. She set the recorder on the desk in plain view. She pressed the button at 0758. The seat next to her, which had been empty on day 1, was now occupied by Sergeant Devin Walker, the one who had said, "That was messed up, Sergeant," on the way out the door the day before. He nodded at her when he sat down. She nodded back. Neither of them said anything. I want you to understand what Walker did by moving to that seat. Walker was a sergeant with 7 years in. He was on track for staff sergeant. He had a wife and a kid in Camp Lejeune. He had nothing to gain by being seen as her ally. The lead instructor of this course wrote the graduation evaluation. The graduation evaluation went into your record. Your record decided what billet you got next. Walker sat next to her anyway. He sat next to her every day for the next 41 days. I called him in 2022. He's a master sergeant now, stationed in Okinawa. He took my call. He talked for about 20 minutes. He said 3 things I want to read you. First, I didn't move seats to make a point. I moved seats because the rest of the room had decided to pretend day 1 didn't happen, and I was not going to pretend with them. End quote. Second, she never asked me for anything. Not once. She didn't need me there. She needed somebody to not move away from her. That was different. End quote. Third, I told my wife about it on day 3. My wife said stay in that seat. So I stayed in that seat. End quote. Walker's wife is named Andrea. She's a nurse practitioner. I have not talked to her, but she is in a small and quiet way part of the reason this story turned out the way it did. I'll come back to that. Day 2 started with Sergeant Major Mullins walking in at 0801. He set down his coffee. He set down his folder. He looked at the roster. He looked at the 3rd row. He saw Walker sitting next to her. He paused for approximately 3 seconds. The transcript captures it as silence. Then he said, quote, "Good morning, Marines. Today we cover the intelligence cycle. Open your handbooks to page 23. Sergeant Walker, since you've decided to sit in the executive section this morning, why don't you read the first paragraph aloud?" End quote. The executive section comment was an instructor's joke. The 3rd row is not the executive section. There is no executive section in classroom 2B. He was telling Walker in front of the room that he had noticed, that he had clocked the move, that there would be a price. Walker read the paragraph. He read it well. He had been a 0231 for 7 years. He knew the intelligence cycle backwards. The sergeant major asked him 3 follow-up questions. Walker answered all 3 correctly. The sergeant major asked a 4th question that wasn't in the handbook and wasn't in the curriculum and was, by Walker's later assessment to me on the phone, a question designed to make me look stupid in front of the class. Walker answered that one too. He didn't get it perfectly. He got most of it. The sergeant major said, "Mostly correct. Sit down." Walker sat down. He sat down next to Tessa. She did not look at him. She did not need to. She wrote 2 lines in her notebook. The lines, which I have seen in a photograph of her notebook page taken later as part of the case file, read, Day 2, 0807. SG Timaj asks Walker question outside curriculum. Target seating. Recorded. That's it. No detorializing. No exclamation marks. 2 lines. Her father taught her to bring paper. I want to walk you through the rhythm of the next 2 weeks before I get to the specific incidents that matter. Because the specific incidents are not the story. The story is the rhythm. Every morning, 0755, she arrives. She sits in the same seat. Walker arrives. He sits next to her. She pulls the recorder out. She presses the button. She opens her notebook to a fresh page. She writes the date and the start time at the top of the page in block letters. Every morning, 0800 or 0801, the sergeant major arrives. He looks at the 3rd row. He says something. Sometimes the something is directed at her. Sometimes the something is directed at Walker. Sometimes the something is directed at the room, but the room understands it is about her. He does not call her Sergeant Mullins for the first 11 days. He calls her, depending on the day, our distinguished classmate, the sergeant in the 3rd row, my former spouse, the one who thinks she's here on merit, and on day 6, Sergeant, what was your name again? Right? Mullins. Same as mine. Funny how that works. Every morning, he grades her in-class participation. He grades it lower than her actual performance warrants. The other instructors, Staff Sergeant Ortiz, Gunnery Sergeant Kim, Master Sergeant Pruitt, see the discrepancy. They start quietly doing something about it. Ortiz, especially. Ortiz starts marking her actual scores on a parallel sheet and turning that parallel sheet in to the Corps Standards officer at the end of each week. The Corps Standards officer is a Chief Warrant Officer 3 named Eileen Park. CWO3 Park has been at the schoolhouse for 4 years. She knows the cadre. She knows the curriculum. She knows the difference between a real grade and a punishment grade. She started a file on the 3rd week. I'll get to that file. Day 5, Friday the 11th of January. Afternoon session. Map reading and terrain analysis. Practical exercise. The class is divided into 6 teams of 5. Each team gets a topographic map of a fictional area of operations in Eastern Europe. Each team has 45 minutes to identify avenues of approach, key terrain, observation posts, and choke points. Tessa's team is herself, Walker, a corporal named Hayes, a sergeant named Bukowski, and a lance corporal named Reyes Ortega. Her team finishes in 28 minutes. They identify all 4 required elements correctly. They also identify 2 avenues of approach that aren't in the answer key, but are arguably correct based on the terrain features. Walker presents the team's findings. Sergeant Major Mullins reviews the team's worksheet. He marks it as 78 out of 100. The next team finishes in 36 minutes. They identify 3 of the 4 required elements. They miss 1 choke point. They have no extra findings. He marks them as 88 out of 100. The math doesn't work. Walker doesn't say anything in the moment. None of them do. The class moves on to the next exercise. At 1,645 hours, when the class is released for the weekend, Walker waits until the sergeant major leaves the room. Then he walks up to Staff Sergeant Ortiz and asks him quietly whether he can take a look at the team worksheets. Ortiz looks at him. He looks at the worksheets. He looks back at Walker. He says, "I'll take care of it." Ortiz takes the worksheets to CWO3 Park's office at 1,700 hours. Park is still there. She reviews them. She makes copies. She puts the copies in a manila folder in the bottom drawer of her file cabinet. The folder is labeled, in her own handwriting, 13-2, Instructor Grading Anomalies, open. That folder ends the course at 117 pages. Tessa Mullins did not know about that folder. Not during the course. Not until much later. CWO3 Park was building it independently. Park was, as she would later tell the lieutenant colonel during the investigation, doing my job. My job is to make sure the grades reflect the performance. They weren't, so I documented it. Park is retired now. She lives in North Carolina. I have not talked to her. She does not give interviews. She sent me one email in response to my outreach in 2022. The email said, in full, "Mr. Hatch, I appreciate the interest. I have no further comment. The record speaks. E. Park, CWO3, USMC Red." 8 words. Then her signature line. The record speaks. That's what she said. I want to point something out here that I think gets missed in stories like this one. The standard way to tell a story about a woman being harassed by a senior man in a hierarchy is to focus on the woman's isolation, to make the point that she was alone, that nobody helped her, that the system closed ranks around the man. That is sometimes true. It is sometimes very true. It was not true here. By the end of week 1, Tessa Mullins had, without asking for any of it, Sergeant Devin Walker in the seat next to her, Staff Sergeant Ruben Ortiz keeping a parallel grade sheet, CWO3 Eileen Park building an anomalies file, and, although she didn't know it yet, 2 other students, Sergeant Bukowski and Corporal Hayes, who had started comparing their own graded worksheets with hers and noticing the pattern. The system did not close ranks around Wade Mullins. The system noticed. The system started quietly building the file that would end his career. That's the part of this I want you to hear. Because the easy story, the one where a brave woman fights alone against a corrupt institution, is not the story that happened. The story that happened is that a sergeant did the work, kept her recorder running, didn't break, and the institution she belonged to, the Marines around her, the warrant officers above her, the staff instructors beside her, recognized what was happening and started, on their own, doing what they were supposed to do. That's not a small thing. That's a very Marine thing. I'm not saying the system is clean. The system produced Wade Mullins. The system promoted him to E9. The system put him in a classroom in front of 30 Marines and gave him grading authority over his ex-wife. The system did that. But the system also produced Ortiz, and Park, and Walker, and the others. You don't get one without the other. The system is what it is because both kinds of people wear the uniform. The question every day is which kind shows up to work, and which kind the room follows when it matters. In Classroom 2B, between January 7th and February 22nd, 2013, the room followed Ortiz and Park. It just took 6 weeks for that to become visible. Let me give you the incidents that mattered. Week 2, Day 8. Tuesday the 15th of January. Afternoon session. Threat assessment writing exercise. Each student writes a 1-page threat assessment based on a packet of source material. The assessments are graded on 5 criteria: accuracy, clarity, prioritization, sourcing, and recommendation. Tessa's assessment is, in Staff Sergeant Ortiz's later assessment, the best piece of analytical writing turned in by any student in the course, including the ones who were already working analysts. Her sourcing is meticulous. Her prioritization is correct. Her recommendation is precise and actionable. Sergeant Major Mullins grades it as a 72. The class average is an 81. Ortiz pulls Mullins's assessment out of the stack the next morning. He photocopies it. He photocopies 6 other assessments from the class. He takes all 7 copies to CW03 Park. Park grades them blind without names. She has done this for 15 years. She's good at it. She ranks Tess's assessment first, out of 7, including assessment from students who Mullins graded at 88, 91, and 94. Park adds the blind comparison to the folder. Week 2, Day 10. Thursday, the 17th of January. Morning session. Oral briefing practical exercise. Each student delivers a 5-minute intelligence briefing to the class, graded on content, clarity, command presence, and ability to answer follow-up questions. Tessa briefs at 0915. She is precise. She is calm. She speaks at a measured pace. She does not use filler words. Her command presence is, in Walker's later assessment to me, like watching somebody who'd been doing it for 20 years. The follow-up questions come from Sergeant Major Mullins. He asks her 7 questions in 3 minutes. The course standard for follow-up is 2 to 3 questions. He asks her 7. 2 of them are not within the scope of the briefing. One of them is a question about a source document she was not given. One of them is a question that requires speculation about future enemy intent in a region she has not been briefed on. She answers all 7. She says, on the 2 she does not have hard data for, I do not have data on that, Sergeant Major. With access to the relevant collection assets, I would prioritize the following 3 indicators. She lists the 3 indicators. He grades the briefing as a 76. The class average for the briefing exercise is an 84. Ortiz takes the briefing recordings, all 30 of them, recorded on the schoolhouse's standard equipment for grade norming purposes, to Park that afternoon. Park watches Tessa's briefing twice. She watches 3 other briefings from students who scored higher. She makes notes. She adds the notes to the folder. Week 3, Day 11. Monday, the 21st of January. Morning. The Sergeant Major opens the class with what he calls a teaching moment. I'm going to read you exactly what he said because this is the moment where, looking back, the other instructors realized this was not going to stop on its own. Kuota. Marines, before we get into today's material, I want to use a moment to address something that's been on my mind. Some of you have been in this Corps long enough to know that personal relationships and professional environments don't mix. They never have. They never will. When you marry the wrong person, you find out. When you divorce the wrong person, you find out again. And sometimes, that person will follow you into your professional environment and try to use it to settle scores. You should be alert to this pattern. You will see in your careers. You may even see it in this classroom. That's all I'll say about it. Open your handbooks to page 41. End quote. The transcript marks this passage as 97 seconds long. He delivered it in a calm, instructional tone, like he was reading from the handbook. Tessa did not look up. She wrote in her notebook, Day 11, 0807. SG Timaj delivers 97-second monologue characterizing my presence in this course as settling scores. Class addressed. Recorded. Walker, sitting next to her, wrote a longer note. I have seen a photograph of his notebook page. It says, he just told the room, I'm part of a vendetta. He told a room of Intel Marines, I'm part of a vendetta. He's lost his mind. Walker did not show Tessa the note. He kept it. He turned it in to the IG investigators in March of 2013 as a contemporaneous record. Staff Sergeant Ortiz was in the back of the room when this happened. He was the assistant instructor for the day. He sat very still for the 97 seconds. When the sergeant major was done, Ortiz got up, quietly, the way you get up in a chapel, walked out of the classroom, walked down the hall to CWO3 Park's office, and closed the door behind him. He told her exactly what had been said, word for word, as best he could remember. Park asked him, "Did the recorder catch it?" Ortiz said, "Sergeant Mullins has a recorder running every session." Park said, "Okay." That was the entire conversation, according to Ortiz's later witness statement. Park did not act that day. She did not act that week. She did not write a memo to the school commandant. She did not call the IG. I want to be honest with you about why. Because this is the part that, if you've never worked in a hierarchy like this, doesn't make sense. CWO3 Park was a Chief Warrant Officer 3. Wade Mullins was a sergeant major. In the warrant community, a CWO3 outranks a sergeant major. On paper, in a classroom where the sergeant major is the lead instructor and the CWO3 is the core standards officer, the lines are less clean. They are both senior. They both have authority. They both report to the school commandant. If Park had walked into the commandant's office in week 3 with one allegation about 197-second monologue, the commandant would have had to investigate. The investigation would have taken weeks. During those weeks, the sergeant major would have stayed in the classroom. He would have known he was under investigation. He would have known who reported him. The pressure on Tessa Mullins, who was already in the third row of his classroom every morning, would have gotten worse, not better. Park knew this. Park had been in the Corps for 22 years. Park understood that the fastest way to end a problem like Wade Mullins was not to be the first one to raise an alarm. The fastest way was to let him build the case against himself, in writing, in audio, in graded worksheets, in front of witnesses, for as long as he was willing to keep doing it. Park let him build the case. She kept a folder. She waited. I want to talk about what Tessa was doing at night. She was renting a one-bedroom apartment in Virginia Beach for the duration of course. A short-term lease, 3 months, on Atlantic Avenue, 4 blocks from the ocean. The apartment came furnished. A small kitchen, a small living room with a couch and a television, a bedroom with a queen bed, a bathroom, a balcony that faced an alley, not the water. She had a routine. Every evening, she came home from class around 1,700 hours. She made dinner, usually something simple: rice, chicken, vegetables. She ate at the small kitchen table. She did not watch television while she ate. She had a paperback copy of a book by John Le Carre on the table, and she read while she ate. She told me, on the phone in 2023, that she read Le Carre every evening during the course because, quote, "I needed somebody else's voice in my head. Not his, not mine, somebody else's," end quote. The Le Carre book, by the way, was Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. She finished it in week 2 and started The Honorable Schoolboy in week 3. By the end of the course, she had read 4 Le Carre novels. After dinner, she would clear the dishes. She would wipe the table. She would sit down with her notebook from that day's class, her laptop, and a glass of water. She would transcribe the day's audio. Not all of it. The relevant parts. Anything the sergeant major said in her direction, or about her, or that touched on her grading, or that was outside the standard curriculum. She would write it out by hand first, then type it into a document on her laptop, then save the document to an external hard drive. She did this every night, for 42 nights. The transcript on her external hard drive, when she finally turned a copy of it in to LT Call Castellanos on the 22nd of February, was 193 pages long. She had not been told to do this. She had not been advised to do this by her lawyer. She did it because her father had taught her to bring paper. And because somewhere around day 6, she had realized something. She told me this on the phone. It was the second of the 3 things she answered. She said, quote, I realized I wasn't going to win this in class. He was the instructor. He set the grades. He set the tone. He could say what he wanted in the classroom, and the classroom was his. So I stopped trying to win in the classroom. I started winning at the kitchen table. The kitchen table was mine. End quote. The kitchen table was mine. Hold on to that. Week 4 was the worst week. Week 4 was when he stopped being subtle. I'll get to week 4 and to the interrogation practical exam on day 21, which I told you in the opening would be the first peak of this story. The moment where, in front of the class, he said something he could not unsay, and she did something he could not have prepared for. But I'm going to break here, because I want to leave you in week 3 with a picture. The picture is this. It's a Tuesday night, the 22nd of January. Tessa Mullins is sitting at the small kitchen table in the rented apartment on Atlantic Avenue. The Luke Hare book is closed on the corner of the table, a paperback receipt sticking out as a bookmark. The dishes are washed and stacked in the drying rack. The laptop is open. The notebook is open. The external hard drive is plugged in, the small blue light blinking once every 2 seconds. The window is cracked an inch. The room smells like coffee and the ocean. It is raining lightly. The rain is hitting the air conditioner unit outside the bedroom window with a small, steady tap. She has been transcribing for an hour and 40 minutes. She has 14 more minutes of audio from the day to go through. She is on her second cup of coffee. The cup is white, ceramic, with a small chip on the rim. It came with the apartment. She is wearing a gray Marine Corps athletic department sweatshirt and pajama pants with little blue anchors on them. Her hair is down. Her feet are bare. She is not crying. She is not angry. She is not afraid. She is working. She types a line. She rewinds the audio. She types another line. She makes a note in the margin of the notebook. She takes a sip of coffee. Outside, the rain picks up for about 30 seconds, then settles back to a tap. That's the picture I want you to hold. Because the dramatic moments of this story, the ones that will end up in week 4 and on graduation morning and in Lieutenant Colonel Castellanos' office at 1,142 hours on the 22nd of February, those moments are real. They matter. I'll tell you all of them. But none of those moments happen without this picture. A sergeant, a kitchen table, a blinking blue light, a cup of coffee, the rain on an air conditioner, and a woman who has decided that the kitchen table is hers and is going to work every night for as long as it takes. That's where the case gets built. Not in the classroom, at the kitchen table. I'll come back. Week 4. Week 4 was when he stopped being subtle. I want to be careful with this part of the story because it would be easy telling it now to make it sound like a movie, to make it sound like the moment where the antagonist reveals his hand and the protagonist finally strikes back. That's not what happened. What happened was slower than that and quieter and in some ways worse. Monday, the 28th of January, day 15 of the course. Morning session, counterintelligence fundamentals. He asked her 3 questions in a row that were not part of the lesson plan. The third question was about a specific incident from the divorce. Not directly. He framed it as a hypothetical. He said, quote, hypothetically, Sergeant Mullins, if an analyst's spouse were to discover that the analyst had been concealing financial information during their marriage, would that, in your professional opinion, constitute a counterintelligence vulnerability for the analyst's continued service? End quote. The class did not understand the question. Walker understood the question. Tessa understood the question. Tessa answered it. She said, quote, Sergeant Major, that hypothetical does not align with the lesson plan for today's session. If you're asking about financial counterintelligence vulnerabilities in general terms, the standard indicators are documented in Chapter 4 of the student handbook. I can address those if it would be helpful for the class. End quote. He looked at her for about 4 seconds. The transcript marks the pause at 3.7 seconds. Then he said, "Sit down, Sergeant. Open your handbook to page 61. She sat down. She opened her handbook to page 61. She had not stood up to begin with. The sit down was a phrasing choice. It was a way of telling her in front of the room that she was being dismissed. Walker, beside her, wrote in his notebook. He just asked her about their marriage in class. As a hypothetical, in front of 30 people. That note also went into the IG file in March. Tuesday the 29th. Day 16. He came in late. He had been in late twice the previous week. He came in at 0813. He did not apologize. He set down his coffee. He looked at the third row. He said, "Sergeant Mullins, stand up. Walk to the front of the room. You're going to lead today's review of yesterday's material. You have 10 minutes to prepare. I'll be in the back of the room. The rest of you, give her your attention." He walked to the back of the room. He sat down in an empty chair next to Staff Sergeant Ortiz. This was not part of the curriculum. Student-led reviews were not part of the MAGTF Intelligence Specialist course. They were not in the lesson plan. They were not in the student handbook. There was no standard protocol for grading a student-led review. There was no standard expectation for what one should look like. He was inventing an exercise on the spot, designed to put her at the front of the room with no preparation, no notes, and a hostile evaluator in the back. She stood up. She walked to the front of the room. She had not had 10 minutes to prepare. She had not had any minutes to prepare. The 10 minutes to prepare was rhetorical. He was already seated in the back. She turned to face the class. She placed her hands flat on the lectern. She said, "Good morning, Marines. Yesterday, we covered counterintelligence fundamentals with emphasis on insider threat indicators. I'll walk us through the 5 categories we covered, give an example of each, and open the floor for questions at the end. Category 1, behavioral indicators." And she taught the class for 43 minutes. She did not use notes. She did not have notes. She walked through all 5 categories from memory. She gave examples for each. She answered 4 questions from other students. She referenced the relevant pages of the handbook for follow-up reading. She closed by summarizing the 3 key takeaways and previewing how the material connected to that afternoon session. Staff Sergeant Ortiz, sitting in the back next to the sergeant major, told me on the phone in 2022, and this is a direct quote, "I have been an instructor at that schoolhouse for 6 years. I have watched probably 400 Marines stand at that lectern. She gave the cleanest 43 minutes I have ever seen from a student. With no notes, with no warning, with her ex-husband sitting 6 feet behind her waiting for her to fail." End quote. When she finished, she said, "That concludes the review. Sergeant Major, I return the class to you." She walked back to her seat in the 3rd row. There was a silence of about 5 seconds. The transcript captures it. Then the sergeant major said, "Adequate. Sit down. Open your handbooks to page 72. Adequate. That was the grade. Adequate. Walker wrote in his notebook. Adequate. 43 minutes from memory. For answer questions, perfect structure. Adequate." He underlined the word twice. Ortiz, in the back of the room, wrote a longer note. He turned it in later. The note said, "SG Maj graded a 43-minute unprepared student-led review as adequate. This is the cleanest instructional performance I have witnessed from a course student in 6 years. Grade does not reflect performance. Documented. That afternoon, Ortiz walked the note to CW03 Park. Park added it to the folder. The folder was at 68 pages by the end of week 4. Wednesday the 30th was the interrogation practical exam. This was the exam I told you about in the opening. The first of the 2 peaks. The interrogation practical was a graded exercise. Each student played the interrogator in a one-on-one scenario with a member of the cadre playing a captured detainee. The interrogator had 30 minutes to extract 3 pieces of information from the role player, graded on rapport building, question structure, pressure management, and information yield. The role player for each student was assigned by the lead instructor. Sergeant Major Mullins assigned himself as Tessa Mullins's role player. That was not standard. The lead instructor did not typically play role players in the practicals. The lead instructor evaluated. The junior instructors played role players. Ortiz, Kim, and Pruitt were the role players for the other 29 students. He assigned himself to her. When she saw the assignment sheet, posted at 0700 hours that morning outside classroom 2B, she did not change expression. Walker was standing next to her. He saw her see it. He told me later that her face did exactly nothing. She went to her seat. She pressed the button on the Olympus WS 852. She opened her notebook. She waited. The exam started at 0900. Students were called in one at a time to the practical room, a small windowless office in the back of the schoolhouse, for their 30-minute exercise. The order was alphabetical. Mullins M. She was the 14th student called. She was called at 1,422 hours. She entered the practical room. The sergeant major was already inside, seated in the role player chair. He was in service uniform. He had a folder on the table in front of him, prepared with the detainee backstory. 2 evaluators sat against the wall, Staff Sergeant Ortiz and Gunnery Sergeant Kim. They were the official graders. The exam was also being audio recorded by the schoolhouse on standard equipment, as all practicals were. So the exam had 3 recordings of it. The schoolhouse recording, Ortiz's evaluation notes, and Tessa's own Olympus WS 852, which was in her cargo pocket, switched on. She sat down. She read the prompt card. The prompt told her the detainee was a mid-level logistics operator with knowledge of supply routes in a fictional area of operations. Her 3 required pieces of information were the location of a primary supply node, the identity of a key courier, and the schedule of a weekly resupply convoy. She had 30 minutes. She began, "I'm not going to walk you through the whole 30 minutes. I have read a transcript of the schoolhouse recording. It is 41 pages long. I'll give you what matters." For the first 14 minutes, she ran a textbook interrogation. Rapport building, open-ended questions, establishing baseline, building source comfort. She was good at it. She was by Ortiz's grading notes, performing at the top of the class. At minute 15, the sergeant major broke roll. He stopped being the detainee. He started being himself. He said, quote, "You think this is going to work on me, Sergeant? You think you can run a script you learned in a classroom and get something out of me? You couldn't get anything out of me for 4 years. What makes you think 30 minutes is going to do it now?" End quote. That is on the schoolhouse recording. The schoolhouse recording captures it exactly. Ortiz and Kim, sitting against the wall, heard it. They both wrote it down immediately. Their independent contemporaneous notes matched the recording word for word. Tessa did not break technique. She did not respond to him as her ex-husband. She did not respond to him as a sergeant. She continued the exercise as if he had stayed in role. She said, quote, "I understand you're frustrated. That's a normal response to this situation. Let's go back to what you were telling me about your route through the northern sector. You mentioned a checkpoint near the river. Can you walk me through the timing on that? End quote. He looked at her for a long moment. The recording captures approximately 6 seconds of silence. Then he said, and this is the line that I told you in the opening I would say once and not repeat. I'm going to break that. I'm going to read this one because the case turns on it and you need to hear it the way the transcript has it. Cool. You know what your problem is, Sergeant. Your problem is you think being smart is enough. You think if you read enough books and pass enough tests and put on the uniform, that makes you somebody. It doesn't. You're still the same girl from Mobile who couldn't keep a husband. The uniform doesn't change that. The rank doesn't change that. You're playing dress up, and everybody in this schoolhouse knows it. End quote. The transcript marks this passage at 22 seconds. It was recorded by the schoolhouse equipment. It was recorded by Ortiz in his evaluation notes. It was recorded by Kim in his evaluation notes. It was recorded by Tess's Olympus WS 852 for independent records of the same 22 seconds. She did not respond to it. She said, quote, Sergeant Major, that's outside the scope of the exercise. Returning to the prompt, your checkpoint near the river. The timing, end quote. He stared at her. She held the stare. She did not blink for what Ortiz, in his later witness statement, described as approximately 11 seconds. Then she repeated the question. Same words, same tone, the timing. He answered the question. He answered it as the detainee. He went back into role. He gave her the timing on the checkpoint. In the next 13 minutes, she got all 3 required pieces of information out of him. The supply node location, the courier identity, the convoy schedule. She got the full information yield with 100% accuracy in an exam where the class average yield was 61%. When the timer went off at 14:52, she said, Thank you, Sergeant Major. That concludes my exercise. She stood up. She walked to the door. She walked out. In the hallway, she put her hand on the wall for about 4 seconds. Then she went back to classroom 2B and sat down next to Walker. Walker looked at her. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She wrote in her notebook, Day 17, 1422 to 1452. Interrogation practical. Full information yield. SG Timage broke roll at minute 15. 22-second statement at approximately minute 19. Recorded by Schoolhouse, Ortiz, Kim, and self. That's the note. That's all of it. Ortiz and Kim, in the small windowless room after she left, sat for about 2 minutes without saying anything. Then Ortiz turned to Kim and said, We need to walk this to Park. Now, they did. CWO3 Park heard both of them out. She asked one question. She asked, Did the schoolhouse recording capture the full statement? Ortiz said yes. Park said, Okay, sit down. Both of you, write your statements now, before you go home. Detail, timestamps, exact wording where you can remember it. Don't talk to each other while you write. They wrote. Ortiz's statement came to 7 pages. Kim's came to 5. Park collated them with the schoolhouse recording, made copies, and added them to the folder. The folder was now at 91 pages. Park sat at her office for about 20 minutes after Ortiz and Kim left. She did not act yet. She told the IG investigators later, in her own statement, why she did not act on day 17. She said, quote, The interrogation practical was a significant escalation, but the course had 2 weeks left. If I escalated at that moment, the sergeant major would have known. He would have had 2 weeks to retaliate against Sergeant Mullins in ways I could not protect her from. He had already shown me what he was willing to do to her grades. I trusted Sergeant Mullins to finish the course. I trusted the file to do the rest. I waited. End quote. That paragraph, when I read in the case file, I read 3 times. Because that is what command judgment looks like. That is what 22 years of worn experience looks like. That is somebody making a decision that costs her sleep, costs her conscience, costs her something every night for 2 weeks, because the alternative costs Tessa Mullins more. Park waited. The folder waited. Tessa went back to the kitchen table on Atlantic Avenue and transcribed the day's audio. She did not transcribe the 22 seconds. I want to tell you that because it surprised me. When LT Call Castellanos' investigators reviewed Tessa's external hard drive in March, they found that the day 17 transcript skipped from minute 14 of the interrogation practical to minute 23. The middle 8 minutes were not transcribed. The audio file itself was there, unaltered, complete, time-stamped, verifiable, undamaged. But the transcript skipped. The investigator asked her about it later during her formal interview. She said, quote, "I couldn't write it out. I tried. I sat down that night, and I tried, and I couldn't put my fingers on the keys to type those words. So I left in the audio, and I moved on to the next day. The audio was enough. The audio said it for me." End quote. That is the only moment in the entire 42 days where Tessa Mullins' discipline cracked. Not in the classroom, at the kitchen table, alone, at night. She couldn't type the words. She let the recorder say them for her. The remaining 2 weeks of the course were quieter. Not because he stopped. He did not stop. He continued to grade her unfairly. He continued to make remarks in front of the class. He referenced the recent interrogation exercise twice in the next 10 days in tones that made the class shift in their seats. But something had changed. The class had seen the interrogation practical. They had not been in the room, but Ortiz and Kim had been in the room, and word moved. By the end of week 4, the entire class knew approximately what had happened. Walker knew. Bukowski knew. Hayes knew. The class knew that the sergeant major had broken roll in a graded exam and said something to a student that he should not have been able to say to anyone in uniform. The class started quietly behaving differently. They did not stop respecting him as the lead instructor in the sense of saluting and sitting at attention. They stopped laughing at his asides. They stopped meeting his eye when he made remarks toward the 3rd row. The room cooled. He noticed. He could not have not noticed. But by the end of week 4, the noticing did not matter. The file was at 91 pages. The audio was building. The course was on a calendar, and the calendar was moving toward the 22nd of February. Tessa kept the recorder running. She kept transcribing at night. She finished the Honorable Schoolboy and started Smiley's People. Walker stayed in the seat. Ortiz kept his parallel grade sheet. Park kept the folder. The morning of the 22nd of February, 2013, was clear. 41 degrees. Light wind off the bay. Graduation ceremonies at Dam Neck were held in a multipurpose room in the schoolhouse, not outdoors, not on a parade deck, despite what I said in the opening. I said parade deck because it sounded right. The actual ceremony was in a converted classroom on the 2nd floor of the main schoolhouse building, with 30 folding chairs for the graduates, a lectern at the front, an American flag, a Marine Corps flag, and a sheet cake on a side table. I'm telling you this because I owe you accuracy. The ceremony was small. It was modest. It was 45 minutes long. 30 Marines graduated. The school commandant, Lieutenant Colonel Reina Castellanos, presided. She had been at Dam Neck for 8 months. She was 43 years old. She was a career intelligence officer. She had served in Iraq twice. She had a master's degree in security studies from Georgetown. She had 3 children, ages 11, 9, and 6. Her husband was a civilian engineer who worked for a defense contractor in Virginia Beach. LT Call Castellanos did not know what was about to happen. She knew the course was ending. She knew there had been some informal mentions from CW03 Park that there were grading anomalies on the course that would need to be reviewed at the post-course standards meeting. Park had told her in a brief hallway conversation the previous Thursday that they would need to sit down after graduation to walk through some things. Castellanos had said, "Okay, Monday morning, my office, block out 2 hours." Park had said, "Block out 4." Castellanos had not asked why. She trusted Park. The graduation began at 10:30. The sergeant major delivered the course commander's address. It was short, 8 minutes. Generic remarks about the importance of intelligence work, the standards of the schoolhouse, the expectations of the graduates as they returned to their units. He did not mention Sergeant Mullins by name. He did not look at the third row. The certificates were distributed alphabetically. Each graduate's name was called. The graduate walked to the front. The lead instructor handed the certificate to the graduate. The two saluted. The graduate returned to their seat. When her name was called, at 1,138 hours, she stood up. She walked to the front. She faced the sergeant major. He had her certificate in his hand. The certificate was already printed. It had her name on it. It had the course title. It had the date. It had 3 signature lines at the bottom. The signature line on the left was for the lead instructor. The signature line in the middle was for the course standards officer. The signature line on the right was for the school commandant. Park had signed her line. Castellanos had signed her line. The sergeant major had not signed his line. He held the certificate out to her. He did not look at her. He said, audibly enough for the front rows to hear, "Sergeant Pruitt, would you do the honors?" Master Sergeant Pruitt, one of the junior instructors who had not been involved in the grading and had been a relatively neutral presence throughout the course, was sitting in the front row. He stood up. He walked to the lectern. He looked at the sergeant major. He looked at the certificate. He looked at Tessa. He took a pen out of his pocket. He signed the lead instructor's signature line. He handed the certificate to Tessa. He saluted her. She returned the salute. She walked back to her seat with the certificate in her hand. The class understood what had just happened. The class understood that the sergeant major had refused, in public, to sign the certificate of the distinguished graduate of his own course. The class understood that this was not a gesture toward her. It was a gesture about her. He was telling the room, in his last act as her instructor, that he did not consider her qualified. The class also understood, by this point, exactly what he was. The room did not react. Nobody clapped extra hard. Nobody made a face. The ceremony continued. The next name was called. The next graduate stood up. At 1,140 hours, the ceremony ended. The graduates were dismissed for the cake reception. Most of them moved toward the side table. Tessa Mullins did not move toward the side table. She walked with the certificate in her left hand out of the multipurpose room. She walked down the second floor hallway. She passed the cake. She passed the other graduates. She passed Walker, who watched her go and did not follow. She walked down the stairs to the first floor. She walked along the main hallway to the administrative wing. She stopped at the door of the office marked School Commandant. LT Call R. Castellanos. The door was closed. The light was on. LT Call Castellanos was at her desk, having returned from the ceremony approximately 2 minutes earlier. Tessa knocked. Castellanos said, "Come in." She came in. She had 3 things with her. The certificate in her left hand, a manila folder in her right hand. The folder contained a 1-page typed written complaint and a USB drive, in a small plastic sleeve, labeled in her own handwriting. Class 13-2, audio log, 42 sessions. She walked to the desk. She placed the certificate on the desk, face up. She placed a folder on the desk beside the certificate. She said, "Ma'am, I'd like to report a hostile work environment." Castellanos looked at her. She looked at the certificate. She looked at the folder. She did not open either one yet. She said, "Sergeant, sit down." Tessa sat down. Castellanos opened the folder. She read the one-page written complaint. The complaint was a single page, typed, single-spaced. It listed 7 specific incidents. Each incident had a date, a timestamp, a brief factual description, and a notation of where the corresponding audio could be found on the USB drive. The complaint did not contain emotional language. It did not contain adjectives. It read like an analytical product, which it was. Castellanos read it twice. She picked up a USB drive. She inserted it into her desktop computer. She navigated to the file labeled Day 17, 1422 to 1452. She put on a pair of headphones from her desk drawer. She pressed play. She listened for approximately 10 minutes. She took off the headphones. She set them on the desk. She said, "Sergeant, stay here." She picked up her desk phone. She dialed a 4-digit extension. The phone rang once. A voice answered. Castellanos said, "This is Lieutenant Colonel Castellanos at MCS Dam Neck. I need to speak with the Division Sergeant Major." Now. She listened for a moment. She said, "Yes. Now. I'll hold." She held. Tessa sat in the chair across the desk. She did not move. She did not speak. The certificate was on the desk between them. Face up. Her name was on it. Master Sergeant Pruitt's signature was on the lead instructor line. Park's signature was on the course standards line. Castellanos' signature was on the commandant line. She had earned it. The division sergeant major came on the line at approximately 1,153 hours. I do not have a transcript of what Castellanos said to him. The phone call was not recorded. It lasted approximately 6 minutes. What I know is what happened next. At 1,208 hours, the division sergeant major called the sergeant major of the Marine Corps directly. At 1,226 hours, Article 15 proceedings were initiated against Sergeant Major Wade Mullins. At 1,330 hours, a provost marshal escort arrived at the schoolhouse. At 1,347 hours, Sergeant Major Wade Mullins was relieved of his instructor duties on the spot, escorted from the building, and informed that he was being reassigned pending administrative action. At 1,500 hours, he was driving north on Interstate 64 toward Quantico. He was demoted within 72 hours. E9 to E8. Reassigned to an administrative billet in a support directorate at Headquarters Marine Corps, Quantico. He never instructed again. He never had access to grading authority over a student or a junior Marine again. He served out the remainder of his career behind a desk, processing routine administrative correspondence in a windowless office on the 3rd floor of a building he had previously walked through in dress blues to give guest lectures. He retired in 2016, 24 years of service. He received the standard retirement ceremony due an E8 with that many years. He received the standard certificate. He did not receive the Legion of Merit that an E9 retiring with his combat record would typically have received. The Legion of Merit requires a recommendation from the chain of command. His chain of command did not write one. He lives, as of 2024, in a small town in central North Carolina. He is married to a woman he met in 2018. He works part-time at a hardware store. I'm not going to use his current address or the name of the town. He is not a public figure. He is a retired Marine living a quiet civilian life. I have no interest in disrupting it. He earned what he earned. The system handled him. He's done. I want to talk about what happened to the others. Staff Sergeant Ruben Ortiz was promoted to gunnery sergeant in 2014. He's a master sergeant now, stationed at the Defense Intelligence Agency on a joint billet, working out of Balling. He took my call in 2022. He gave me the 7 minutes I needed, and then he asked me, politely, not to call back. I haven't. Chief Warrant Officer 3, Eileen Park, retired in 2018 at 28 years of service. She received the Legion of Merit on retirement. The citation, which I have seen, includes a paragraph about her meticulous documentation of training standard anomalies that resulted in significant institutional reforms at the Marine Corps Intelligence Schoolhouse. That paragraph is 1 sentence long. It does not name the case. It does not need to. The people who needed to know what it meant knew. She lives in North Carolina. She does not give interviews. The email I quoted earlier, "The record speaks," is the only direct communication I have ever received from her. Sergeant Devin Walker is, as I told you, a master sergeant in Okinawa. He's on track for first sergeant. His wife, Andrea, is still a nurse practitioner. They have 2 kids now. He told me, at the end of our phone call in 2022, one more thing. He said, "Kuota, I'll tell you the part that doesn't show up in the file." The part that doesn't show up in the file is that for 6 weeks, that woman did not give him 1 inch. Not one. She didn't argue. She didn't break. She didn't cry. She didn't ask anyone for help. She just kept showing up. Every morning. Same seat. Recorder on. Notebook open. And every night she went home and worked. I saw her in the parking lot one evening, walking to her car, and I thought, that's not somebody surviving this. That's somebody building something. That's the part one remember. End quote. That's somebody building something. Lieutenant Colonel Reina Castellanos retired as a full colonel in 2021. She runs a consultancy now in Virginia Beach that advises defense contractors on intelligence community standards. She declined to be interviewed for this. She sent a 1-line email through her assistant. The email said, "Tell the story straight, Mr. Hatch." That's all I asked. I hope I have. The schoolhouse changed 3 policies as a direct result of what happened in Class 13-2. First, instructors with a prior personal relationship to any student are required to recuse automatically with no waiver possible. Second, lead instructors may not serve as role players in graded practicals involving students under their direct grading authority. Third, all graded practicals are recorded on schoolhouse equipment, with the recordings retained for 1 year and available for review by the student or by the Corps Standards officer on request. Those 3 policies are still in effect. They are referred to, informally, by instructors at Dam Neck as the 13-2 reforms. Most of the current instructors do not know where the name comes from. The ones who do don't talk about it. I want to come back to Tessa Mullins. She was promoted to Staff Sergeant in 2014, to Gunnery Sergeant in 2017. She submitted her Warrant Officer package in 2019. She was selected on the first board. She was commissioned as a Warrant Officer 1 in 2020. She promoted to Chief Warrant Officer 2 in 2023. She is currently assigned to the MARSOC Intelligence Cell at Camp Lejeune. She works in a small office on the 2nd floor of the North Wing. She has a bun coffee pot on a side table. She has 1 book on her desk, a Penguin Classics edition of Sun Tzu, the Lionel Giles translation, $9.99 retail, with pencil marks in the margins on about 1/3 of the pages. She kept the last name. She never changed it. I asked her about that on the phone in 2023. That was the 3rd of the 3 things she answered. She said, Quota. People ask me sometimes why I didn't change it back. I tell them the truth. I tell them I earned what's attached to that name in the Corps. He didn't. Every promotion that name carries, corporal, sergeant, staff sergeant, gunny, warrant, chief, those are mine. Not his. He doesn't get to take that with him into civilian life. He left the name behind when he left the schoolhouse. The name stayed with me. The name's mine now. End quote. The name's mine now. I think about that sentence a lot. I think about it because what Tessa Mullins did in the largest sense was take something that had been used as a weapon against her and turn it into a piece of her own armor. The marriage, the divorce, the threat, the classroom, the grading, the name itself, all of it, every piece of it. He gave it to her as something he meant to break her with. She picked each piece up, examined it, and put it on as part of her own kit. The recorder, the notebook, the kitchen table, the folder, the certificate, the signature she did not get, the signature she got instead, the name on the certificate, all of it became hers. That's the part of this story I want you to take with you. Not the demotion, not the phone call in the commandant's office, not the audio. Those are the visible parts. Those are the parts the press release would cover, if there had ever been a press release. There never was. The Marine Corps does not put out press releases about Article 15 demotions of senior enlisted instructors. The case is in the record. The record is in a building. The building is in Virginia. What I want you to take with you is the kitchen table, the blinking blue light on the external hard drive, the Luke Care paperback, the cup of coffee with the chip on the rim, the rain on the air conditioner, the sergeant in the gray sweatshirt with bare feet, transcribing day 17, getting to minute 15, stopping, sitting back, not crying, not breaking, deciding quietly alone at 2,143 hours on the 30th of January, 2013, that the audio would say it for her. That's where the case got built. Not in the courthouse in Mobile in 2009. Not in the recruiter's office in 2010. Not in classroom 2B on day one. Not in the commandant's office on graduation morning. At the kitchen table. Every night. For 42 nights. I have one more thing to tell you before I close this out. In 2024, last year, I drove down to Camp Lejeune to deliver some documents to a friend who works in the public affairs office. It was a Tuesday, late morning. I parked in the visitor lot near the main administration building. I walked across the parking lot toward the entrance. A woman in Marpat walked past me, going the other direction. Chief Warrant Officer 2 rank insignia on her collar. She was carrying a manila folder under her arm. The corner of the folder was bent. She was walking briskly, the way people walk when they have somewhere to be and an idea of what they're going to say when they get there. I did not see her face clearly. She was wearing sunglasses. I did not stop her. I did not say anything, but I saw the name tape on her blouse. It said Mullins. I watched her cross the parking lot. She got into a beige sedan parked 4 rows over. She set the folder on the passenger seat. She started the car. She pulled out. She turned onto the main road. She was gone. I stood there for a minute. I thought about the Olympus WS 852 somewhere in a drawer in her office or in a box in her attic or possibly long since recycled. I don't know which. I thought about the external hard drive with a 193-page transcript on it. I don't know where that is either. I assume she still has it. I would. I thought about the certificate with 3 signatures on it. Pruitt's, Parks, Castellanos's, framed on a wall somewhere, or in a folder, or in storage. I don't know. I never asked. I thought about her father, Ray Boudreaux, retired lineman, Mobile, Alabama. I thought about him teaching her to bring paper. I wondered if he knew. I wondered if she had ever told him. I thought I would probably never know that either. I walked into the administration building. I delivered the documents. I drove home. That's the record now. You're part of it. So am I. I don't have anything to ask you tonight. No subscribe push. No comment prompt. No closing call to action. I'm not going to do that with this one. Just sit with it. A sergeant in the third row. A recorder on the desk. A notebook open to a fresh page. 6 weeks of audio. A folder on a lieutenant colonel's desk at 1,142 hours on the 22nd of February, 2013. And a name on a certificate that she earned. The name's hers now. Good night.